The first of those is Linus Opara, who is a distinguished professor and DST in RF, and he might want to explain that, South Africa Chair in Post-Harvest Technologies, the Faculty of Agricultural Sciences, Stellenbosch University, South Africa. He's an editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Post-Harvest Technology and Innovation and co-editor of Agriculture Mechanization in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. He is chair-elect of the International Society of Horticultural Sciences, Vegetables Section. Dr. Opara.
Okay, thank you, colleagues, and thank you for staying behind and to attend this particular session. First of all, before I start, I would like to thank the organizers, Asabe and Lalit, for the opportunity to come and share some thoughts with you. What I'm going to do during the time I have is to run through some thoughts about the whole issue of food security, and then try to situate it between the work I do in particular in the area of post-harvest technology. And in between, I'll be trying to strike some notes on some areas that I feel there are opportunities for us to continue to make contribution to address this global challenge. And so I'm going to phrase my presentation with two questions. I'm going to ask the question, what is the nature of the global food production deficiency, and how does this relate to the work of agricultural and biological engineers? And then the second part will relate more closely to my area of work, which is post-harvest, in terms of the needs and the areas of opportunity where we could find entry points to make a contribution here. So most of us will agree now that food is back on the menu, so to say. And what does that mean? For some people, it means that they will have a plate full of food any time of the day. And for some people, it means that somebody may come to their rescue and donate some food to them for them to have enough to eat. And for some, actually, maybe they're eating too much. And maybe something needs to be done so that people can eat less and eat only what they need. And this whole issue of food and the challenge of not having enough food is not entirely new. During some periods of disaster or war times, governments have had to take actions in terms of helping to address the issue of food security. And if you looked at the media, and also in print, in academic books, in proceedings, so much information now, especially in the last 15 years, about food security. Conferences, meetings, some here in the United States, some in universities here in Canada, and so on and so forth. Everybody's talking about food security, so it's not surprising that we, as agricultural and biological engineers, should also talk about it. In the last 10 years as well, probably less than that, a few academic journals have also come up, because this has been identified as an area that is important for professionals to make a contribution, and I've shown some of those there. And I bring it much back home for me in the continent, in Africa. The African Union had declared this year as the Year of Agriculture and Food Security in Africa, and actions are being taken at various levels. In the university where I work, our late Vice Chancellor, who just passed away last month, also set up a major program, what we call the Food Security Initiative. And you'll see at the bottom there that the work we do in the area of post-harvest was identified as a critical element, as a contribution of engineering and technology to this issue of post-harvest, the issue of food security. So what is this food security, and why is it a challenge? Now, that question is not new. Most of you know more about food security as a topic better than I do. But the reason I ask that question is that we need to find some entry points in terms of what we do as agricultural and biological engineers. Our entry points are very, very important because of the specific skills and competencies we have. And I've been grappling with this issue over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And that was why I spent some time to capture it in a perspective article, which is available. I can make it available to people who want to read. And one of the things I found out when I did that review article was that the whole issue of food security in terms of availability, access, stability of supply and utilization are basically at the crux of what we do as engineers trying to solve problems in agriculture and food systems. So those perspectives, those dimensions of food security, to me, present the first point of conversation for us to begin to ask ourselves, if food availability is a problem, what do we do? Or what have we been doing in the past? If access to food is a challenge, what do we do as engineers? And what have we done in the past? If the stability of the supply is also a problem, what do we do? What kind of skills? What kind of teams can we put together to begin to address those issues? And some of those have been touched on the bottom side there in terms of some technical issues about transportation, about storage, about increasing the efficiency of the food system, and so on and so forth. The issue of number of people that are hungry is well known, so I'm not going to go through those again. But I just wanted to show this because as agricultural and biological engineers, our job ultimately is to serve humanity. And often it is said that the weakest link in the chain determines the strength of the chain. So, of course, we know there are variability temporally and time-wise, but it's also important for us to understand the regions of the world that are most vulnerable on some of these issues, because that can also influence the type of programs and activities we engage in. So that's why I showed that problem. And that particular slide speaks to sub-Saharan Africa in particular. So despite all the advancements over the last 100 years, in terms of production technology, in terms of post-service and processing, we still have one spot in the continent, in the world, that all the projections for the future is still indicating food insecurity. And this is quite interesting to note. Despite all the technology that is currently available, despite the projections of what we can do, the continent, the sub-Saharan Africa in particular, all the projections are still bleak. And I think we need to be aware of that as we interact with the continent. So we're a global profession, so we need to think about what's happening around the world. And I think this was 2011. I was on a flight coming from Ethiopia back to South Africa. And on that particular day, the news was that the world has just hit 7 billion people. And that French magazine had these pictures of what the hotspots are. And you recognize one of them is somewhere in Nigeria, in Lagos. Another one is a classroom in India. Another one is, I think it was a computer or marketplace in China. Just to give you a snapshot of the kind of issues we are dealing with here. So the numbers are quite there. But it's also interesting that we should note that in some parts of the world, the trend is that that population will continue to rise. And that has implications on food availability and the way agriculture is practiced. As an agricultural engineer living and working in my continent, Africa, I'm interested in these kind of issues. Now, people may call it land grab, water grabbing, or whatever. But the point now is that the world has realized that the current production may not be sufficient. And if you look at all those dimensions of food security, in terms of the stability of the supply, people are now reacting. And some of them are call it panic buying. People want to get land in advance, 50 years to come, 99 years, to give them some assurance, some guarantee that they can produce. For me, as somebody living in the continent with the least developed agriculture in terms of the role of engineering, this is particularly also very, very important in terms of our role. That what it tells me now is that other people around the world are no longer waiting for African agriculture to transform and develop. They are now coming in there to buy the land and participate in agriculture. So if our 80% of our farmers are subsistence smallholder farmers, what is the likelihood that an investor from the USA or the Middle East or indeed anywhere who buys 400 hectares or buys 30,000 hectares, what is the likelihood that they will cultivate that with subsistence agriculture? I think it's very unlikely. They will need machinery. They will need to mechanize because that is an investment. We also do know that about 60% of uncultivated land globally is in that continent of Africa. What is our role? Why has it taken so long for mechanization to have the impact it has had in the rest of the world? To me, that is a challenge. This is the kind of issues that we need to think about. The technological solution is important, but the mind frame, the conceptualization of the strategy is also important, so that as agricultural and biological engineers, we can also influence policy. To me, this is particularly important. We have to help the politicians, the policymakers, to capture what is possible from agricultural engineering and not just make do with the way we have done things 100 years ago. And I think that is the tendency. Now, this has also implications. We already heard some commentary about water supply. Look at So a lot of the land that has been bought so far is in Africa. But look at also if you convert it to the water equivalent of what is extracted. What are the implications for water supply in the future? What are the implications for sanitation of people? So there is a real call for agricultural and biological engineers. And I was having a chat yesterday, lunchtime, with my friend Kishida, and we agreed, and I actually agreed with him. He said that our job is to take some action as engineers. Our job is to make science for action. And I think this is an important point as an entry point for agricultural and biological engineers. So for me, I bring it much closer home to what I do, which is the area of post-harvest. So I want to reduce post-harvest losses. And I want to find a way to minimize food wastage along the value chain. If I can do that, maybe I could make a contribution to the problem of global food security. So for me, this is a good time to do research. Okay? It's a good crisis as a researcher in my area of work. All the headlines are supporting what I do. So I need to grab the moment. Agricultural and biological engineers need to grab the moment because everybody is talking about food security, everybody is talking about post-harvest losses and food waste. And so what I did also is that I try to write a few editorials when I have time, just to bring this to the attention of policy people in different ways, that we have a role to play. And I think all of us have a role to play to find a way to communicate what we can also do in addition to the technical component. I think this is very, very important. So the problem of post-harvest losses and waste is not entirely new. About 33 years ago in America, the Academy of Science, National Academy of Science, produced the first seminal report quantifying and reporting the issue of post-harvest losses. And I just want us to pay attention as agricultural and biological engineers and see the difference between the report of 33 years ago and the report of 2.5 years ago. 33 years ago, it was a problem of developing countries. It was mainly about grain staples. It was only about losses, physical losses due to technical inefficiency. Now, if you look at the report of FAO now, it is now talking about losses in both developed and developing countries. So this is also important in terms of food supply. All types of food. It's now talking about losses that are due to technical inefficiency, which we call losses, and wastage, which happens very close to the consumer. This is also very, very important. And of course, the environmental stresses associated with these losses. So I think we need to pay attention to that. The other part I think is also important is the way we define what is food and what is good quality food and bad food. As engineers, we have many people who work in detection systems, in sensors, quality standards. Can we influence quality standards? Why is it acceptable in our retail systems at the moment to throw a banana that has about 2 degrees extra bending in the shape? Why is it acceptable? When we do know as scientists and engineers that the nutritional content has not been compromised. What are we doing to influence market standards and trading patterns? I think this is very, very important. The quantity of food losses, I'm not going to go through that. Now, this is also important in terms of areas of intervention and entry points here. This graph is very, very popular and common. Everybody knows, most people know about it. But I just want you to focus on sub-Saharan Africa and look at what's happening in North America in terms of where the losses are occurring. Again, that will determine our entry point, where we can make gains through the type of technologies that we'll work on. Both in root crops as well, it follows the same pattern here. As an agricultural engineer, I find this graph very useful. I borrowed it from a colleague of mine at the International Rice Research Institute. And if you just look at the 2 lines there in terms of small retailers, and below is the large retailers, and starting from sun drying, just see the difference in losses, the amount of losses due to type of technology that's applied. By changing the technology of drying grains, of storage, of milling, we can reduce losses by half. So these are the issues that we need to think about. As an agricultural engineer, I'm interested in those technologies. Even on the health component of the food, apart from physical losses, what are we doing about the health and nutritional components of the losses? Because we do know there is evidence that if we do it right, if we dry the grains with the best practices and store them properly, we can reduce some of the safety compromises that can happen in the food product. These are some of the areas that we should think about as well. Look at this effect of mechanization in Asia, in Southeast Asia. responses in labor shortages, which is a major problem even in a place like Africa. Losses can be reduced if we do the operations very, very properly. Look at the effect of just leveling the field before planting. Just leveling the field alone, yields can increase by 5 to 15%. This is a good story of agricultural mechanization. How many people know about this? Look at the effect on reducing water consumption. And of course, the impact on weed and pest control. These are entry points for agricultural engineers, and I'm sure if we do it well in the field, it will also have impacts on post-production operations. And I'm just going to finish up very quickly by just emphasize the whole issue of post-harvest losses. We do know that from the potential yield of whatever we grow down to the available yield, we do know the entry points in terms of production. But at the final stage, post-harvest has a huge influence. So as engineers working in the agriculture and food systems, we need to begin to understand these ecological impacts on agriculture and food that we produce and decide where we can enter. I think this was about 20 years ago, so this diagram, I got it when I was working in New Zealand. It just shows you that if we do the post-harvest right, it is not only just about increasing the quantity of food. We can also create additional value and employment in agriculture. So 20 years ago, if you bought an apple in the UK, more than close to 70% of the price that you pay is attributed to post-production operations. So in communities where employment is a problem, where there's youth unemployment, we have stories to tell. Instead of them just growing raw materials and shipping it elsewhere. So if we can engage in post-harvest activities, we can, such as packaging, storage, marketing and grading and sorting, we can create employment opportunities. These are good stories of agricultural and biological engineering. This is more recent data from South Africa. If we ship our fruit to Europe, this is the value proposition that we have. This is the spread of value from the farm. Less than 15% of the value of the citrus we export to Europe comes back to the farm. The rest of it is distributed along post-harvest operations. This is something that we need to know, and so that we can find entry points and intervene in terms of helping communities with food security. And this generalized map, I can't quite remember the source, I've had it for some time. It just shows you the relationship between investment in post-harvest technology and economic development. Very linear relationship. And this is the kind of story we want to talk about as agricultural and biological engineers, that if we begin to invest in education, in human capacity development, in infrastructure development, in research and development, that it is possible to turn communities away from food insecure to food secure. Finally, if I bring this story to the continent of Africa, many of you have seen this graph, opportunity everywhere, potential is big. In fact, we can swallow the whole of North America and parts of Europe. Why are we not able to transform the agriculture using the latest knowledge in engineering and science to make the people in that part of the continent secure? We have challenges as engineers. The farms still remain stubbornly small. Whether it is good or bad, I'm not quite sure. We have a challenge. What are we going to do next? What have we tried in the past? Can we still mechanize smallholder agriculture to work? Those are questions. Can we get more yield per drop? Can we do something to reduce losses, even in those small farms? Those are very, very important. Another issue that I think that people forget is that there is an assumption that there's surplus labor in a lot of developing countries and rural areas. My practical experience now is that that is no longer the case. The young people have actually moved out, and you have old women and men in those places. What are we going to do as engineers? So that is where knowledge and technological innovation becomes very, very critical, and I think it's important that we engage in that. So in order to transform a continent like Africa to a place of food abundance that can feed itself and also contribute to global food security, this is the type of picture we want to see. But in between that, we have to do something. We need agricultural engineers. We need biological engineers. Education, research is important. This data is a bit old. Africa contributed less than 1% to global knowledge creation in terms of published papers. I think that has increased now to 1.8%. What are we doing through partnerships, through collaboration, through strengthening the institutions as an association, as engineers working together to solve those problems? So if we do it right, it is possible. Like a place like Africa can make a significant contribution, not only to its own people, but food security around the world. Because the resources are there, but people don't eat potential. A sick child does not go to a potential hospital. You take a child to a hospital. A hungry child is not given potential bread or fish. You give a child fish or bread if they're hungry. The potential is there, but I think engineering has huge opportunity and prospect to really help transform Africa. And the last slide here, we talk about the crops that feed the world. I just want you to have a quick look here. Countries like Nigeria are spending millions and millions of US dollars now importing rice so that people can have food. But look at the crops that feed Africa. What type of research have we been doing on them? And compare with the crops that feed Asia, that transformed that part of the world into true green revolution. I just want us to think about this and think about what we can do through our education and research purposes. I was flying from Ethiopia during the last World Economic Forum. I opened the magazine. I saw this advert for Skype for cutting the crop there. On the same newspaper or magazine, I saw advertisement for tractors. There was also advertisement for people to go on holidays in the same country. I just want us to think about it. What can we do to transform places like that to become food baskets of the world? We have the skills, we have the competencies, but we have to think also how we can advise policy and influence policy to bring about the change that we talk about. Thank you very much.